I'll show you how to link some texture files in if you want to do something a little bit fancier maybe with your texturing and lighting this week for your renders. I'm just going to hide this guy. So there's usually two different ways that I'll add like fancy textures past just like, cool, this whole object is purple now. So you just basically assign a new material, same way you have been. So select your object, right click on it, go down to assign new material. And then in this case, I'm going to be rendering with Arnold. Hopefully my computer doesn't explode while doing this. And just select standard surface shader. Again, same way you've been doing for the last few weeks. In later weeks, I'll show you how to use some of the other render engines like Redshift. But I found it's easier to just like learn one render engine and then you kind of like know how they work and you can transfer more easily into another one. But Redshift in particular is really nice for animation classes when you have to render like 700 frames a week, and if they take 5 minutes each, that's like 3 full days of rendering. Redshift renders really fast, which is why anim kids like it. Anywho, so I could go in, here's my surface shader, I could change the color, I could make this blue if I wanted to. I'm gonna turn on shading mode. But if you'll notice, so to the right of all of these sliders, there's like this weird little checker button here. If you click on that, it'll give you the option to map in, like, ooh, we're lagging hard here. It'll bring up this little box, and it'll pretty much allow you to hook up either a file texture or some like in Maya textures onto your object. So for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to click checker texture. Oh my god. Ooh, wow. This is lagging really aggressively. Give me 4 seconds, I'm gonna like close some stuff on my computer. Holy crap. This is impressive. Close. Close everything. Alright. And I'll also close this internet tab. Alright. Cool. Hopefully that is slightly less awful with lag. So, you'll notice that it is now a awkward sort of prison screwdriver. It's like black and white striped. If you ever apply a texture and you don't see the texture show up, like you apply it and your screwdriver still looks like this, you can toggle shaded mode on or off by pressing 6 on your keyboard. So again, press 6. Or you can just press this little shaded button up here. It's just like it's like a sphere filled with a checkerboard texture. This will also toggle your shading mode on and off. So you'll notice, again, this doesn't really look anything like a checkerboard. That's because of the UVs of the object, and I'll explain that more next week. For this week, you could just go, just do a simple automatic map on your object if your texture looks terrible when you put it on. So select your object, and just go up to UV, and automatic. Give it a minute. There we go. And you can see it's not perfect, but it now is like significantly more sort of checkery than it was 10 seconds ago. For the purposes of this demo, it's fine. Like I said, I'll go over how to make nice UVs next week, and then the week after it'll be a little bit about how to make textures specifically for your UV'd object. And that's when things start getting really fun. Anywho. But yeah, so for these Maya textures, you'll notice, so I clicked on the object again, I have my material information pulled up. You'll notice that now that I have this checkerboard mapped into the color, the icon on the side changed from like this little checkerboard to like a click-through square with an arrow. So if I actually click on that, it'll take me back to my checkerboard texture. And from there I can modify like the colors of this checkerboard. Oh my. So much lag. So I could like make it whatever color I want. You could also, so like anywhere you see these little checkerboard boxes next to an attribute, it means you can map values into it. So like I could go deeper into this map, and I could put like a ramp shader on this if I wanted to. And you'll see there's now like a weird gradient on what used to be the blue squares, where it goes from like black to white. Like you can get really ridiculous with doing textures in Maya. It's kind of fun. Like I could make this all crazy and squiggly if I wanted to. Anywho. So questions on just like mapping, checkerboard texture, or like anything I just went over for texturing. Alright. If you decide you're like, well, perhaps I don't want this screwdriver to be like black and gray squiggles and pink checkerboards because that's vile looking, you can break the texture and like remove that texture map. So if you just come over and right click on the name, like the text name of the attribute, just go down to break connection and it'll remove that map. It usually assigns like a weird color to your material, but the map is gone, so yay. At which point you'll see that the icon has gone back to the checkerboard texture, meaning that it's ready to accept a map. So if I click on that again, I'll show you one of the other really common Maya textures I use, which is a noise texture. So I'll click on that. It'll add this like weird sort of cloudy texture to stuff. And then it'll give you all these attributes, which you can slider around to get whatever look you're looking for. If you do frequency, like a lot of times I'll use this for just like making like crappy little textures on something. Just set the frequency up to be higher. It'll make a finer texture, and you'll notice that when it's a finer texture, you don't notice the seams and the UVs as much. You can also, like, if you go to color balance, you can like twiddle with the colors of this as well. The noise texture is just sort of like useful to have around. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna break this connection again. So most of the Maya textures that I use on a frequent basis are like the checker texture, the cloth texture, noise texture, and a ramp shader. All of them are pretty straightforward. Like if you ever just want to go and like fiddle with them in your free time, like this is a cloth texture. It just sort of makes like a sort of generic cloth looking pattern, and you can change the colors of this. The one other thing to be aware of, so it's like I'm at my material, I'm going to go click into my color. You'll notice that when you're editing like whatever you have mapped into your color channel, so in this case the cloth texture, so here's cloth 1, that'll give you the attributes for like the color of the cloth, all that good stuff. Next to that, usually to the right, is like this place 2D texture node. If you go into here, there's a super fantastic option that I absolutely love and adore. You actually just saw me fiddling with it like 2 seconds ago, but it's the repeat U and repeat V checkboxes. So all of the textures that Maya creates are tileable. So in other words, you can like you can put the left side of the image against the right side, and you're not going to notice any seams or changes in coloration. It's going to look perfectly smooth like it's one texture. So like you can use this to basically change how many times the texture appears on your model, which I'll go over more in detail next week because it involves like a little bit of knowledge of UVs. But like just for now, note if I set this to like 100, it'll make like a much finer cloth texture than it would before. It actually looks kind of fun. I don't hate that. Anyway, so are there any questions about that? Cool. Such an awkward like cloth. I really like the cloth thing. I don't know why. Anywho, so I did mention you could also map files in. So I'm just going to click on the little checkerboard box next to color. And instead of picking one of like the checker or cloth textures, I'm just going to select file. At which point it should bring you to this tab with information about the file you've selected. But I haven't selected a file yet, so you'll notice that the image name is blank and there's nothing displaying on my model. Just click on this little folder button, and you can navigate around to find. Perfect. You can put a hot glue gun. Oh, that's gorgeous looking. Oh, okay. I know what happened here, I think. Wow, that's kind of cool looking, but totally not what I was expecting. Oh, wait, is it texture file? What the heck did I just click on? Alright, new plan. Find picture of my creepy face. No, I'm not. I'm far too lazy for that. Alright, I'm just gonna try a different image. Grab this JPEG. Hopefully it works. Okay, that was more what I was expecting. I think I grabbed a weird file type that was like a .tx file, which is not at all what I was going for. So if you, for now, just grab like JPEG, PNG, TIFF, EXR, Maya takes pretty much all file formats. You can even map in a PSD if you want to. But yeah, so you'll notice that there is now a pencil sharpener on my screwdriver handle. So you can do that if you want. Like, I'd probably map in like a wood text or something for this if I wanted to make it less ridiculous. But you will notice, just like as a demonstration of bad UVing, you'll notice that there's like a really, really hard seam here where it's like pencil sharpener and then immediately becomes my finger and it like doesn't look at all good. Again, that's something that can be fixed with good UVing, and I will show you how to do that next week. But this is just kind of a demo about why you want to lay your UVs out well so you don't have stuff like this in your model. Any questions about putting a file texture in? Cool. So if you scroll down, and this also applies to like a lot of the Maya textures, if you scroll down, you can modify like the color balance if you want. I can adjust the exposure of this image. I could also go down, the other thing that I use most frequently, under the effects tab, there's an invert button, and it pretty much works the same way that invert in Photoshop does, where it'll take black and make it white and make it black. If you have blue, it'll turn it like a weird orangey salmon color. But it's good, like every once in a while you put in a texture map and it does kind of the opposite of what you expect. Sometimes hitting invert will fix that, but yeah. So there are a lot of places that are super awesome for getting pre-made textures. One of them, the lag is real. So one of them is textures.com. They have a lot of, you can download like objects, like you can actually download like an OBJ of the object and it'll give you textures and stuff for it, so you can pretty much like render out this exact piece of bread if you wanted to. They also have a lot of decals, and just like stuff with transparency with alphas, which is nice because you can go back and use this really easily to create your own custom textures with like grime or chips of paint, stuff like that. And again, I'll go over like more of how to do that in future weeks. But the things like for this week that would be good to look at are like these 3D scanned materials and PBR materials. 3D scanned is someone literally like took a 3D scan of an object, or like of a material, and they converted it into a texture. But you can see they have like a lot of different stuff to choose from, and most of them turn out pretty well if you just like map them into the channels in Maya. It'll render out most of the time and look pretty darn nice. PBR materials are just physically based render materials, which again, I find these are pretty much, they have flannel! Yes! Sorry. I love flannel, it's great. But like, I find the PBR materials and the scan materials pretty much have the same files in them, they're just separated based on how they were made, I guess. But yeah, so you can click into these and like download any of these. Paper towels, amazing. The only downside with textures.com is like you need to create an account, and then you get like 15 free credits a day to use on downloading textures. It's like if you go down, you'll be like, okay, cool, like I can get a 500 or like a 512 by 512 image free. Like they're not bad to have around, but they're not like the highest res. And you can only download 15 credits worth a day, so it's like the one drawback to the site, so I just downloaded them for grins. The other place you can go to is called HDRI Haven, and they have a bunch of, they have a bunch of other textures that you can use if you click on the texture tab at the top. These are all free. They should be able to be used I believe commercially, and like if you wanted to use these textures as like a model you were selling or something like that, I believe you could. But they have a bunch of materials here, which are again pretty darn nice looking. If I click into this guy, you can download all the maps. And the nice thing about HDRI Haven is if you can actually choose the format, like JPEG or PNG for the image, and you could download like 1K or 8K images if you wanted to. For the record, there is really no reason probably for this class to go above a 2K image. You reach a point, if you get to like an 8K image, your computer really won't like it sometimes. I tried to do like a 10K image for a texture I was doing once, and it crashed Maya like 8 times. It was annoying. So you can stick to like a 1 or 2K image for that class. That's more than fine. I'm gonna download these PNGs for guys. So assume you find like a texture that you like, and you're like, cool, I want to map this into my handle. I actually have some downloaded from before, so I'm just gonna use those. I'm gonna assign this handle a new standard surface shader, and just click on the little checker thing next to color. Click on file. Navigate to wherever the heck my files are, which are in my source images folder. Maya defaults to putting all of your images, like all of your texture maps or orthographics or like any images you're reading into Maya. It defaults them to the source images folder, so I like to just keep all of my textures in there so I don't need to like fight Maya and go navigate to different folders every time I want to click something. So I think I'm just gonna, let's do green metal rust. So usually it will, oh, I know, okay. So normally, like the color channel is going to be called either albedo or diffuse, diff. So I'm just going to click that, and it should map on like this weird, like green paint texture. One thing I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to add the sphere in the background and the ground plane, because I'm actually going to start rendering this in a sec. So in case I didn't mention this before, if you ever, like if I wanted the sphere to be the same texture as this, this screwdriver handle here, it's pretty much the same process as you'd use to assign a new material, so just like right click, but instead of clicking assign new material, click assign existing material. And I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of low on the screen, but it'll give you a drop down of all of the materials you have in your scene. It is a good idea to label your materials so they're not just like AI standard surface 1, AI standard surface 2, because once you get 20 textures in your scene, it's insanely confusing if they're all just called AI standard surface. But anyway, so just select the one you want, it'll apply it to the texture. So I'm just going to real quick add a light in here. I'm going to go to panels, look through selected just to position the light. I'm going to say can exist here perhaps. I'm going to set the light intensity to like 1000 because I'm feeling aggressive. And then I'm going to go back to my perspective camera. So panels, perspective, persp. Persp is your perspective camera. That's what Maya calls it. You can also find all your cameras in the outliner over here. If you ever need to like find them, click on them to like change their settings for some reason. I'm going to render a smaller image so I don't break my computer. Cool. Yeah, let's go 640 or 640 by 480. Feeling retro. Anyway. Alright. So normally doing test renders at like smaller resolutions is totally fine. Just like for your actual final, just scale up your thing so it's like the appropriate size. Alright. Well then. That actually looks kind of fun. But yeah, so you can see that like the texture is now applied to the material, but they also gave you like a bunch of different other maps to use for this object. So like you could pretty much take all of those different maps they gave you and plug most of them into these material channels and get more or less the same result that the default image on the website displayed. So the next one I usually go to is just roughness. Under the specular tab, you'll see roughness. So again, I'll just map a file texture into that, go in, select my images, and grab the rough texture, which is like this weird gray color. And if you can also render only a portion of your scenes, like if you click and drag, it'll make this little red box. If you hit this button, the render region button up here, it'll render only what's in that box, which is like great for speeding up your render times. But yeah, so you'll see now that the, what the heck is this called? The handle has gone much less shiny than it used to be. One thing I noticed that Arnold does a lot with the roughness channel in particular, there's a setting you need to click to make the thing render correctly. So if you go down under your file tab where you like selected the file you wanted, scroll down under color balance, check alpha is luminance. This might not be like the most obvious texture to see this on, or it will be, apparently. So once you check alpha is luminance, it'll actually put some of the specular stuff back into your object. For some reason, a lot of times if you don't check that, it just comes across as like super gray and flat and gross. It basically doesn't read the texture map. So I'm actually, let me rotate this sphere around just so you have like this rust patch in the front. So in this case, I think what I was expecting for this paint color is probably for the whole thing to not be insanely shiny and maybe just to have certain areas shiny. So if you want to, you can go down, okay, yeah. So I'm just going to click back into my rough list to access the settings for the file. And again, down under effects, there's this little checkbox for invert. If I click on that and re-render this region, it'll invert the roughness. So you can see it's like over in here where it used to have like a really, really hard shiny area in it. It was like super, super bright white. It's a lot more diffuse now. It's a lot softer. The light sort of wraps around softly instead of like just concentrating on one really sharp pinpoint. And again, I'll go over all of these like settings and like specific texture things a bit later, but are there any questions about this so far? Cool. So usually, it also gives you, it gives you a bunch of maps. Usually the ones that I worry about that'll give you like a pretty reasonable result if you render something is just the color, the roughness, and then if you scroll down to under geometry, in Arnold it's under geometry, you'll see this little tab for bump mapping. Again, put a file texture in there. For bump value, you can see that it has like a little click-through texture. That's your, it's basically saying like this is where your file is. You just need to click through, and you'll have access to the file itself. So again, I'll just go through and find the one that's labeled bump. PNG, cool. So once that's applied, you can actually, this one does actually display in the viewport. So if well, you can see it looks really gross and kind of weird. So if I render this image frame now, you can see that it has sort of like a lumpy, grainy texture to it. And that's the bump map. It just adds like basically fake detail to the surface of your object. So instead of having to, make this a really dense mesh and like make it all lumpy, the bump map kind of does that for you. There's also two different ways to do this. It's like normal and displacement map, but I'll go over those a bit later. For now, I'll just use like a bump map is fine. Attaching normal maps are better, but attaching them in Arnold is like kind of annoying. So again, later problems. Cool. So if like I'm looking at this and I'm like, this bump maybe looks like a little aggressive. Like I don't think a wall would be that insanely lumpy. So if I go to my texture, I'll click back through. Usually to edit, there's like a little bump node in here, and you just click on one of these arrows till you find it. But you'll see there's like this bump 2D. You can edit the bump depth so it makes the bump map less aggressive. So like if you watch the circle up here, when I can make the bump really intense, or I can make the bump like barely intense at all. That's just like a way to adjust how the bump map comes up, because a lot of times when for some reason like the default bump maps everything comes with are like insanely intense to the point where like it looks really unrealistic. So usually I'll have to take that value down a little bit. But yeah, so any questions on that? Alright. There's one more thing that I want to show you guys. So for this week, if you want to, it's not a requirement, but if you wanted to like go through for whatever you're modeling and like add some kind of texture to it, there's a lot of neat like brushed metal textures or like stuff like that if you're doing like rings or jewelry or like whatever. You can just like throw those on your object to start playing around with textures a little bit early, and just get familiar with how to map in textures, so that when we actually do texturing, you're just like a little bit of a jump on the game. But there's one more thing that I want to show you, and that's an HDRI image. What that is basically it's an image with more data about color than the monitor can physically display. And this is not, you need like special file formats for this. It's not going to be like a JPEG or a PNG. Like they will never be HDR images. And you can actually, so you can basically use an HDR image to light your entire scene. So like right now, I have this area light hanging out, and that's what's lighting my scene. So if I get rid of that and I re-render, the whole thing's going to be black. So again, you can find these HDRI images on places like Texture Haven. They have a little tab at the top for HDRI. Go to there, and then you can scroll down and find random HDRIs. Find one I haven't used before for grins. Cool. How does everyone feel about Shanghai Bund? Alright. We're gonna grab this. So I'm just gonna grab the 2K texture. And again, 2K textures are usually fine for your HDRI. Like a lot of times people grab like a 16K texture and it doesn't really look all that different when you render it. But it just slows your computer down. Alright, well that's taking forever. I have HDRI saved. So anyway, to apply an HDRI into your scene, you're just gonna go to the Arnold tab, go down to Lights, and add a sky dome light. You'll notice it puts this enormous sphere around your whole scene, pretty much. So if I pull up my render window again, and render the scene, so again, this is a light, so my scene is now lit. It's just like a really gross soft light. But what you can do, so you notice if my sky dome light is selected, for the color, you can actually map in colors to this, and that's where you want to put your HDRI. So again, just grab a file texture, navigate through. I don't know where the heck I saved these. Cool. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to use this HDRI downloaded like yesterday. So I grab this guy, and you can see that the texture has been applied to that weird circle in the background. If I re-render this again, you will notice that everything is kind of lit differently, because it is taking all of the information from the HDRI and putting it into the lighting. So like anywhere there's a bright light on your HDRI, there's going to be a bright light in your Maya scene. And if you look at this, like the computer can interpret this better, but like if you look at this, it's pretty much just like, imagine your object is sitting in the middle of this area and being lit by like all of these red neon lights, all of these like bright lights here, all of the shadows, etc. Does that make sense? Cool. So if you want to, for some reason I usually just like don't use HDRIs in my personal work, but you could totally use an HDRI to light your scene this week if you wanted to. I'm actually going to break the connection for the roughness and the bump map really quick, just to make a point. Alright, so if I make these guys shiny again, you'll also notice that if the settings on your material are right, it'll also reflect the background that's on your HDRI. Alright, fine, I'll make it exceedingly metal. And that should be pretty reflective. So if I scroll in, like you'll notice that like neon red strip lining the wall is like reflected in my sphere. So HDRIs are a really convenient way to just sort of get realistic looking lighting based on an actual place. That makes sense. Cool. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is sampling. So you'll notice, I should render bigger, shouldn't I? Fine, maybe I can just scroll and cheat. So sampling. So you'll notice that, especially under or like in the area where there's shadows, which I will find momentarily. Okay, so. Alright, sorry. I'm trying to find a specific thing. Oh, oops, I rotated my thing there. Alright. So you'll notice that in a lot of areas, especially on the ground plane, there's a lot of like weird like graininess happening, and like especially in here in the render, in the shadows under here, there's like, it's like super grainy. It's not a uniform texture at all, like you might expect from like a shadow. That's caused by sampling. In Arnold, it's really easy to edit the samples. So if you go into your render settings up here, it's like this little slate or like clapboard or whatever it's called with the gear icon under it. Right up here. So go in there, under the Arnold renderer tab, it'll give you all these sliders, and those adjust the samples of your image. So basically all a render is it's the computer going through, and for every single pixel in the image, it's asking a bunch of different questions. So it's like, what color is the object that I'm rendering right now? How shiny is it? How reflective is it? Is it metal? What color light is shining on it? Like, is there anything blocking that light? It asks like hundreds of questions for every single pixel in the image. So if you've ever wondered like why it takes a while to render a 1920 by 1080 image, it's because there's like 2,073,000 some pixels in that image, and for every single 2 million whatever pixels, it's asking like hundreds of questions. It's a computationally annoying process. And basically for samples, what the sample is how many times it asks a specific question. So like how many times it'll calculate what the value of that shadow is. The more times it calculates that, the better the average is for the value it actually displays. And the less grainy your picture will look, if that makes sense. It's good to know how it works, but functionally just know how to edit your samples. But the goal is basically, what's the lowest number of samples possible to give me a decent image result? If you bump this setting up to like 300, you're probably going to destroy your computer. So like I'll take this up to, I don't know, I'm just going to say 7. And I'll re-render this little region in here. So you'll notice that when I render this, compared to the super grainy original image beside it, this image is, it's still a little bit grainy, but it's like way better than it was before. Can you guys see that on the projector? Okay. And that's samples. So like I could bump this up a little bit higher. Again, the higher your sample rate, the longer it's going to take to render, but also like you need your stuff to look nice. You kind of like don't have a choice sometimes, so you just need to keep rendering, like keep adding samples. You can also twiddle around, like sometimes the different sliders do different things, but like for the most part, it's like if you have graininess in your shadows or like just like this a flat surface of a plane like this, usually you're going to want to look at either camera AA or diffuse and edit those samples. If you're having graininess like in your specular highlights here, you'd add specular, all that good stuff. For this week, you should probably only need these top 2 sliders, mostly the top one that's camera AA. So like if I bump this back down, what if I do 15 because I'm feeling really aggressive? So I'll just re-render this whole camera, or sorry, I'll re-render this entire image with 15 samples instead of like 3 for camera AA. You'll notice how much longer it's taking. I kind of regret this decision now. Well, this is waiting. Are there any questions about sampling or rendering? So from here on out, for the renders, like, I didn't really touch on sampling the first few weeks, but now that I have, I expect whatever renders you guys to submit to have not a bunch of noise caused by sampling in them. So definitely, if your image looks grainy or noisy around any of the shadows or any of the textures, play with your samples and then re-render until you get something that looks not grainy and not gross like the first image I have. Again, it'll totally take longer to render, but it'll be worth it in the end. Just like take the take the mindset that like any of these models could be used on a portfolio website. Like you don't want crappy low-res, icky-looking images on a portfolio website, so like don't submit them for your assignments. But you can see this is taking forever, but you can see like even without me zooming in, it totally looks smoother than the original image. It just takes forever. And again, this is why people like Redshift, because it would probably have this whole thing rendered really nicely, like a minute after the thing was done, and that's for like a full HD image. But yeah, so I'm just gonna let that keep rendering. Does anyone have questions about anything we went over in class today? All right, any questions about assignments, final projects, anything? Cool. In that case, is there any other things that people had questions about for like poly modeling or whatever they wanted me to do a quick demo about? Do like random objects or like extruding or whatever. All right. In that case, open lab / you are free to wander. Oh, did you like demo idea? Like the actual, like where the menu is? Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'll stop this cursed render. How long did that even take? 2 minutes and 32 seconds, and it got like 75% done a 640 by 480 image. That is sad. Anyway, oh, in case I didn't mention this, the other thing, so if you guys are having issues with your images saving too dark, I think I mentioned this last week, but like if you open up your render view, just go to File, Save Image, and open the tool settings for that, and then just select Color Managed Image. Don't leave it as raw, because that'll basically darken your image and make it look different from how it appears here. Anyway. Cool. Alright. So let me just like make a random curve really quick and stuff. Curves. What am I doing? Extrude. Cool. You'll notice again that it flipped my thing inside out. So I'm just going to go to surfaces, reverse direction. All right. So what was your question? Just how to convert this into a polygon?
Yeah, I guess I was getting like some kind of parallel trying to do it why.
Okay. Usually.
So like, if I decide to extrude really fast right now, like
Okay. What is it? What does your error message say?
Select these two nerve curves as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's if you ever have issues like with a tool that you're using, so like if I grab this curve and I go surfaces extrude, you'll notice if it flashes up like a little red bar at the bottom right of your screen, you can actually, there's a button that'll open your script editor. You can read the full length of that error. It's like I should have just pulled up the same area, where it's like select at least 2 NURBS curves, profile curves, then path curve. But yeah, so normally, if you guys ever have errors, like mine's actually usually pretty good, where it'll give you, if you just like copy and paste this text into Google, like usually you can figure out a fix for that error. In this case, all that it's saying is that to do an extrude, you need to select 2 curves. And if you only have one selected, it's not going to work. So it needs a profile curve, so like the shape that you want your little squiggle to be, and then the path curve, which is the design or like scroll shape, if that makes sense. If you select them in the wrong order, just like undo it and select the correct order and do it. So what you need to do to actually extrude that is select like the little circle first, shift, and then select the scroll shape. And then when you go to surfaces extrude, it should actually create the shape for you. Yeah. Any other questions on like NURBS curves or anything? Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And it looks like you got a successful curve there. Sweet. All right. Yeah. So for the wine glass, if you go to Create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool, usually it's good to do this in like a perspective mode, or I'm sorry, in an orthographic mode. So I'm just gonna be like, cool. Oh my lord, this is the worst wine glass ever. But yeah, so if you make a shape, you should be able to go like, so just do surfaces revolve. I imagine what's happening is it probably did something like that. Okay. Yeah, so if it does something like this, where you're not expecting it, just Control Z, and usually you're going to have to change the axis preset. There's, like, honestly, most of the time I'll just click through it. In this case, like, I know that I want the y-axis, because that'll give me, like, a nice revolved object. But yeah, so I mean, if that's the case, like if it just extrudes in a direction that you're not expecting, just change the axis. And then just kind of click through till you find one that works. That's my usual methodology. Yeah, so any other questions on curves or polygons or anything else? Alright then. Is that what? Okay. So in that case, I guess back to Open Lab, or I can run around, like, answer questions. You guys are free to go. You're also welcome to stay and, like, ask questions for, like, as long as I hang out here. I usually hang out until I catch a train anyway, so.